the shot that opened Hell's Gates, a full overview of World War I. On June 28, 1914, a single shot echoed in Sarajevo. Few would have guessed that it didn't just kill an archduke, it killed an entire era. In less than 5 years, the world witnessed the collapse of 4 empires that once dominated the globe, the death of over 20 million people, and the disintegration of all old values. This wasn't just a war between great powers, it was the end of the old world and the beginning of a world filled with fractures, hatred, and instability. From the corpse-filled trenches of France to the blazing fronts in the Middle East, from the frozen lines in Russia to maps redrawn with blood, World War I not only shattered monarchies, but also gave birth to fascism, communism, and an era of confrontation that spanned the entire 20th century. Let's embark on a 6-chapter journey, where the story unfolds before your eyes, revealing this tragic panorama, a chapter of history that must not be forgotten and must never be repeated. The global fuse, colonial thirst, and imperial divisions. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Europe, the heart of the industrialized world, beat with the rapid pulse of transformation. The Second Industrial Revolution had brought unprecedented advancements in science and technology, accelerating production and capital accumulation to unforeseen levels. However, this development occurred unevenly, creating deep fissures in the system of international relations. The old powers like Britain, France, and Russia, empires that had established vast colonial networks centuries prior, were in a stable phase but also faced new challenges. Great Britain, with the saying, "The sun never sets on the British Empire," remained the undisputed mistress of the seas and possessed the largest colonial system in the world, stretching from India, Canada, and Australia to a significant portion of Africa. France, despite losing some major colonies to Britain, still maintained strong influence in North Africa, and notably, the entirety of Indochina. The Russian Empire, while lacking extensive overseas colonies, was a colossal continental power, expanding its territory through conquests in Central Asia and seeking warm water ports. Meanwhile, the young powers such as Germany, the United States, and Japan rose at a breakneck pace driven by strong expansionist ambitions. Germany, unified in 1871 under the leadership of Otto von Bismarck, quickly became a leading industrial empire in Europe. With its superior steel, chemical, and arms industries, Germany yearned for new markets and raw materials, yet felt disadvantaged in the almost completed division of colonies by the older powers. Germany's desire for a place in the sun escalated tensions, particularly with Britain and France, who controlled most of the resource-rich territories. The United States, after its Civil War and rapid industrialization, also began to look outward, acquiring the Philippines, Cuba, and Puerto Rico from Spain, and asserting its role on the global economic stage. Japan, through the Meiji Restoration, rapidly modernized its military and industry, ready to compete for influence in Asia, especially with China and Russia. The contradictions between the old and young empires were not limited to economics, but also extended to military and geopolitical spheres. The arms race became more intense than ever, particularly the naval buildup rivalry between Britain and Germany. Each nation strove to increase its military might, viewing it as a tool to protect its interests and expand its influence. To counter these tensions, the great powers formed military alliances, turning Europe into a powder keg awaiting ignition. The Triple Alliance, established in 1882, included Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. Germany sought to isolate France and contain Russia, while Austria-Hungary sought protection against Russia and the burgeoning Balkan states. Italy initially joined this alliance but later showed hesitation and ultimately switched sides when the war broke out. In response, a rival alliance formed, the Triple Entente, comprising France and Russia, established in 1894, later joined by Britain through the Entente Cordiale with France in 1904 and the Anglo-Russian Convention in 1907. The goal of the Entente was to contain the power of Germany and Austria-Hungary. The formation of these two opposing military blocs created a fragile balance. where a minor conflict could quickly escalate into a total war. While the focus of tension was in Europe, similar upheavals were occurring in other parts of the world, particularly in Asia. Japan, with its growing military might, began an aggressive expansionist policy. After victories against China in the First Sino-Japanese War, 1894-1895, and against Russia in the Russo-Japanese War, 1904-1905, Japan asserted its position as a regional power, seizing Taiwan, Korea, and beginning to encroach on parts of China, especially in the northeast, Manchuria. Japan's rise not only altered the Asian landscape but also created a new concern for Western powers. Further south, in Indochina, a fertile land under French colonial rule, the lives of the indigenous people were steeped in misery. France had been pursuing a brutal policy of resource exploitation, from rubber and coal to rice, serving the needs of the mother country. They established plantations, mines, and factories, but the profits primarily flowed into the pockets of French capitalists. Furthermore, as the shadow of war began to spread across Europe, France initiated a policy of conscripting Vietnamese soldiers into the French army. Tens of thousands of young Vietnamese men were sent to Europe, facing death on unfamiliar battlefields without understanding why. They were treated as cannon fodder, forced into wars that weren't their own, enduring discrimination and terrible living conditions. These unwilling soldiers, however, became living witnesses to the brutality of the war and the injustice of colonialism, sowing the seeds for future independence movements. Overall, the world at the turn of the 20th century was a complex mixture of technological progress, economic competition, imperial ambitions, and intricate military alliances. Every nation, whether powerful or subjugated, felt the pressure of an inevitable confrontation. Conflicts piled up, the cracks deepened, and just a small spark was enough to ignite a global conflagration. An atmosphere of tension enveloped Europe and spread to other continents, signaling a dark period about to descend, where concepts of national honor, territorial ambition, and the arms race would be tested in the fires of war. From a single shot to a great war, the outbreak of war on June 28, 1914, a peaceful morning in Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia-Herzegovina, was shattered by a fateful gunshot. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, along with his wife, Duchess Sophie, was on an official visit to the city. This trip, designed to demonstrate the empire's stability in its newly annexed territory, turned into a tragedy. As the motorcade passed through a crowded street, a member of the Serbian terrorist group, the Black Hand, Gavrilo Princip, fired 2 fatal shots. Franz Ferdinand, who represented the power and succession of one of Europe's mightiest empires, fell dead on the spot, as did his wife. This assassination was not the sole cause of the war, but rather the direct spark that ignited the powder keg of tension accumulated over decades. Austria-Hungary, with strong backing from Germany, immediately blamed Serbia and saw this as an opportunity to suppress rising Slavic nationalism in the Balkans, a direct threat to the territorial integrity of this multi-ethnic empire. A month after the assassination, on July 28, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. Immediately, a terrible chain reaction of declarations of war began, dragging all of Europe into the abyss of conflict. Russia, in its role as protector of Slavic peoples in the Balkans, ordered general mobilization to support Serbia. This action was perceived by Germany as a direct threat, and on August 1, Germany declared war on Russia. 2 days later, Germany declared war on France, Russia's ally in the Triple Entente. To execute its Schlieffen Plan, a lightning-fast strategy aimed at knocking France out of the war before Russia could fully mobilize, Germany invaded Belgium, a neutral nation. This act enraged Britain, which was the guarantor of Belgium's neutrality. And on August 4, Britain declared war on Germany. In less than a week, Europe's major powers plunged into a conflict whose scale and devastation no one could have predicted. Initially, all sides believed the war would end quickly, perhaps before Christmas. Germany, with its highly trained army and modern weaponry, applied a lightning war strategy, the Schlieffen Plan, on the Western Front. This plan called for a swift attack and encirclement of Paris through Belgium, aiming to defeat France within weeks before shifting forces to the east to deal with Russia. German troops poured through Belgium and quickly advanced deep into French territory, causing great panic in Paris. However, the Schlieffen Plan unexpectedly collapsed at the First Battle of the Marne in September 1914. The French army, under the command of General Joseph Joffre, along with the British Expeditionary Force, BEF, launched a decisive counter-offensive. The fierce fighting lasted for several days, involving millions of soldiers. One of the most memorable moments was when the French mobilized Parisian taxis to transport reinforcements to the front lines, demonstrating their determination to defend the capital. Despite heavy losses, French and British forces pushed back the Germans, forcing them to retreat and dig trenches to entrench themselves. The Battle of the Marne not only saved Paris from falling, but also ended Germany's hope for a short war, ushering in an era of prolonged and brutal trench warfare. Meanwhile, on the Eastern Front, the unexpected role of the Russian army forced Germany to divide its forces. Although Russia was considered a giant with feet of clay due to its backward and disorganized army, its speed of mobilization and attack was much faster than Germany had anticipated. As soon as the war broke out, Russian troops quickly advanced into East Prussia, Germany, and Galicia, Austria-Hungary. Although they later suffered heavy defeats against German forces at Tannenberg and the Masurian Lakes, Russia's presence compelled Germany to divert a significant portion of its forces from the Western Front to the east. This weakened Germany's advance in France and contributed to the failure of the Schlieffen Plan. The outbreak of war was not limited to Europe. Colonies worldwide were also rapidly drawn into the vortex. In Africa, German colonies were attacked by Britain and France. In Asia, Japan, an ally of Britain, immediately declared war on Germany and quickly occupied Germany's colonies in China and islands in the Pacific. The Ottoman Empire, with its strategic location and complex relations with European powers, was also gradually drawn into the war when it allied with Germany and Austria-Hungary in October 1914. The shift from a localized conflict to a global war occurred with dizzying speed, completely altering the world's landscape. The arms race, complex military alliances, and the imprudence of political leaders transformed a single assassination into an unprecedented bloodbath. The world entered a new era of total war, where technology was used to slaughter millions, and the daily lives of all people were completely overturned. The shot in Sarajevo had opened the gates of hell, and no one could tell when they would close again. Trench warfare and the global picture after the failure of the Schlieffen Plan at the First Battle of the Marne, the Western Front quickly stalemated. Instead of a mobile war with lightning-fast attacks, both sides began to dig deep into the earth, creating an entrenched defensive system. From late 1914, hundreds of kilometers of continuous front lines formed, stretching from the North Sea coast in Belgium across northern France and ending at the Swiss border. This was trench warfare, a grim war of attrition where life and death were separated by only a thin layer of earth. The trench system was not merely a series of ditches, but a complex network of parallel defensive lines, connected by communication trenches. The first line was the front line trench, where soldiers directly faced the enemy. Behind it were support trenches, reserve trenches, and underground bunkers for shelter. Between the opposing trenches lay a desolate wasteland filled with mud, barbed wire, and corpses, known as no man's land. Every attack across this land was a suicidal mission, facing machine gun fire, artillery, and chemical gas. Living conditions in the trenches were incredibly harsh, wet, cold, filthy, infested with rats and lice. Diseases spread rapidly, and trench foot became a nightmare for soldiers. Psychological exhaustion, haunted by death and the chaos of the battlefield, gnawed at the morale of millions of soldiers. While Europe was engulfed in the fires of trench warfare, the global picture of the war also expanded to other continents. In Asia, Japan quickly seized the opportunity to expand its influence. As an ally of the Entente powers, Japan declared war on Germany and focused on eliminating Germany's presence in the Far East. In November 1914, Japan successfully occupied Jiaozhou, a crucial port in Shandong that Germany had leased from China. Along with this, the Qingdao Railway and other German concessions in China also fell into Japanese hands. Japan then issued the 21 demands to China, seeking extensive economic and political control, a shocking move that worried Western powers about Japan's hegemonic ambitions in the region. Back in Europe, while the Western Front was locked in a stalemate, Germany and Austria-Hungary concentrated significant resources to confront Russia on the Eastern Front. This front was much larger, stretching for thousands of kilometers, from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea. The Eastern Front was a grueling struggle with large-scale offensives and counteroffensives, causing immense casualties for both sides. The Russian army, though numerically superior, suffered from a severe lack of weapons, ammunition, and logistics. They frequently endured heavy defeats against the better equipped and organized German forces, as in the Gorlice-Tarnów offensive in 1915. Nevertheless, Russia maintained significant pressure on Austria-Hungary, forcing this empire to divert forces and weakening Germany's offensive capabilities in the West. 1916 witnessed two of the most brutal and costly battles in human history, both symbols of the ferocity of trench warfare: the Battle of Verdun and the Battle of the Somme. The Battle of Verdun, which lasted from February to December 1916, was a German attempt to bleed the French army white. Commanded by General Erich von Falkenhayn, German forces relentlessly attacked the fortress of Verdun, a strategic French defensive position. For 10 months, millions of shells were fired, turning the battlefield into a moonscape wasteland. An estimated 700 soldiers from both sides were killed, wounded, or missing, with casualty rates nearly equal. Verdun brought no significant strategic advantage to Germany, but it became a symbol of the immense sacrifice and resilience of the French army. Immediately afterward, to relieve pressure on Verdun, the Entente launched another major offensive, the Battle of the Somme, beginning in July 1916. This battle was a joint Anglo-French effort to break through the German lines. The first day of the Somme, July 1, 1916, was the bloodiest day in British military history, with nearly 60 casualties in just a few hours. The Battle of the Somme lasted almost 5 months, and like Verdun, it was a horrific war of attrition. The result was millions of casualties for all three sides, Britain, France, and Germany, without achieving any significant strategic breakthrough. Hundreds of thousands of young soldiers perished in the mud of the Somme, further solidifying the image of a senseless, brutal, and never-ending war. Beyond these large-scale battles, the political and alliance landscape continued to shift. Italy, initially a member of the Triple Alliance with Germany and Austria-Hungary, switched sides and joined the Triple Entente in May 1915. This decision was largely due to territorial promises made by Britain and France, especially regarding Austro-Hungarian lands with Italian populations. Italy's entry into the war opened a new front in the Alps, forcing Austria-Hungary to divert even more forces. Conversely, Bulgaria, with territorial ambitions in the Balkans, joined the Central Powers, Germany, Austria-Hungary, Ottoman Empire, in October 1915, helping the Central Powers control the vital supply route to the Ottoman Empire and putting further pressure on Serbia and Greece. By late 1916, it was clear that the war had far surpassed all initial predictions. It was no longer a quick conflict, but a prolonged, brutal struggle on a global scale. New technologies like machine guns, heavy artillery, and chemical weapons had turned the battlefield into a slaughterhouse. The great powers were increasingly exhausted of resources and manpower, but no one was willing to back down. Trench warfare had reshaped military strategy, transforming individual bravery into enduring patience in a living hell, and sowing the seeds for even greater upheavals to come. The world stood at a historical turning point, where initial hopes for an easy victory had vanished, replaced by weariness, pessimism, and profound questions about the future. The Russian Revolution and a geopolitical turning point A's, the brutal trench warfare entered its third year, the situation in Russia grew increasingly dire. The Russian Empire, with its backward and underdeveloped economy, could not bear the burden of total war. Millions of peasants were conscripted into the army, leaving vast swathes of farmland empty and causing severe famine on the home front. Women and children toiled in factories, but food and fuel supplies remained constantly deficient. On the battlefield, the Russian army continuously suffered heavy defeats against German and Austro-Hungarian forces, despite brief periods of minor gains. The shortage of weapons, ammunition, medical supplies, coupled with poor command, led to colossal casualties. Millions of soldiers were killed, wounded, or captured. Reports of successive defeats and mounting death tolls fueled widespread discontent among all social classes, from soldiers at the front, to factory workers, to peasants in the countryside. The prestige of Tsar Nicholas II, who had personally taken command of the army, plummeted. The royal family was rumored to be under the sway of mystical figures like Rasputin, further escalating public outrage. In February 1917, Julian calendar, March in the Gregorian calendar, the discontent erupted into the February Revolution, beginning with protests by women and workers in Petrograd, now St. Petersburg, demanding bread and peace. The uprising quickly spread and gained the support of local soldiers. Garrison troops refused to fire on civilians and joined the rebellion. Within days, the situation became uncontrollable. Tsar Nicholas II realized he no longer controlled the army or the country and was forced to abdicate on March 15, 1917, ending the over 300-year Romanov dynasty. A provisional government was formed, primarily composed of members of the State Duma parliament, with the goal of establishing a democratic republic. However, the provisional government made a grave mistake by continuing to participate in the war, hoping to achieve an honorable victory. This not only failed to calm the situation, but also intensified the anger of the people who were utterly exhausted by the war. Simultaneously, workers and soldiers' Soviets, councils, especially the Petrograd Soviet, began to form and exert significant influence, creating a situation of dual power and political chaos. Meanwhile, on the Western Front, naval warfare also reached its peak. Germany intensified its use of U-boats, submarines, to blockade Britain, cutting off vital maritime supply routes. This was an attempt to cripple the British economy and force the nation to surrender. German submarines sank hundreds of Allied merchant ships, causing severe damage. However, this strategy also had a disastrous consequence. It drew the United States into the war. The United States, under President Woodrow Wilson, had maintained a policy of neutrality in the early years of the war, despite its strong economic ties with the Entente. However, two crucial events in 1917 forced the U.S. to change its stance and enter the war. The first was Germany's declaration of unrestricted submarine warfare in February 1917, meaning that all vessels, including civilian ships of neutral nations, could be attacked if they entered Germany's blockade zone. This led to the sinking of several American ships and caused widespread outrage among the American public. The second was the discovery of the Zimmermann telegram in January 1917, in which Germany proposed an alliance with Mexico against the U.S. in exchange for Mexico regaining territories lost to the U.S., such as Texas, New Mexico, Arizona. This telegram was intercepted and deciphered by British intelligence, then widely publicized in the U.S., causing a strong wave of protest. On April 6, 1917, the U.S. Congress voted to declare war on Germany. America's entry into the war was a major turning point, as the U.S. brought immense economic and military potential, along with abundant manpower, which the Entente desperately needed after 3 years of war of attrition. At the same time, in Russia, the political situation grew increasingly unstable. The provisional government progressively lost public support due to its continuation of the war and its failure to resolve urgent issues of land and food. This presented an opportunity for the Bolsheviks, under the leadership of Vladimir Lenin, to seize power. Lenin, who was secretly transported by Germany from Switzerland back to Russia, issued the slogan "Peace, Land, and Bread," which resonated with the vast majority of the population. The Bolshevik Party, with strong support from workers and soldiers in major cities, carried out the October Revolution, November 1917, according to the Gregorian calendar. This revolution primarily an organized military coup, overthrew the provisional government and established the world's first Soviet government. One of the first and most crucial actions of the Soviet government was the signing of the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk with Germany on March 3, 1918, officially withdrawing Russia from the war. This was a humiliating peace treaty for Russia, as they had to cede a large portion of their territory, including the Baltics, Finland, Poland, and parts of Ukraine, to Germany and its allies. Despite the significant loss of territory and resources, Russia's withdrawal from the war brought peace to the Russian people, fulfilling one of the Bolsheviks' most important promises. For Germany, this was a tremendous strategic victory. It allowed Germany to transfer millions of troops from the Eastern Front to the Western Front, creating a temporary numerical advantage and a final opportunity to win before American forces arrived in large numbers. The Russian Revolution not only changed the course of the war, but also created an unprecedented geopolitical turning point. The emergence of the Soviet government with its communist ideology divided the world into two opposing camps, sowing the seeds for the ideological confrontation that lasted throughout the 20th century, known as the Cold War. Russia's withdrawal from the war brought hope to the Central Powers, but America's entry into the war was a decisive factor, tilting the balance of power toward the Entente. The world stood on the brink of irreversible changes, with a new superpower rising from across the Atlantic and an unusual new political system emerging in the East. The fate of the war would now be decided on the final bloody battlefields of Western Europe, the knockout blows, and the surrender of empires after Russia's withdrawal from the war through the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. Germany faced a golden, but ultimately final, opportunity to turn the tide of the conflict. With the Eastern Front stabilized, the German General Staff decided to commit all forces and resources to the Western Front. The plan was to launch a series of large-scale offensives, known as the Spring Offensive or Kaiserschlacht, beginning in March 1918. The goal was to break through British and French lines before American forces could land in large numbers and unleash their full power. Initially, the German offensive achieved significant successes, reaching several Allied positions and advancing deep into French territory. Using new stormtrooper tactics and concentrated artillery fire, German forces caused widespread panic and forced British and French troops to retreat considerably. Paris was once again threatened by German long-range artillery. However, the German advance could not be sustained. The German army was exhausted after years of war and no longer had the capacity to adequately supply its advancing units. Furthermore, the lack of tanks and other motorized vehicles prevented them from fully exploiting initial breakthroughs. Despite gaining ground, they could not destroy the opposing armies or break the Entente's fighting spirit. Meanwhile, American troops began to arrive in increasing numbers in France, bringing a new wave of determination and power. From late 1917 and especially in 1918, hundreds of thousands of American soldiers, known as doughboys, crossed the Atlantic. At its peak, up to 650, American troops participated in military operations. Not only did they bring overwhelming numbers, but the US also introduced tanks, modern weaponry like Browning, automatic rifles, and improved artillery, and the high morale of soldiers who had not been exhausted by years of war. The arrival of American forces significantly shifted the balance of power, providing the manpower and equipment that the Entente desperately needed after long years of enduring losses. After successfully repelling the German offensives, the Allies, with the support of American forces, shifted to counteroffensives. From July 1918, they began a series of major counteroffensives across the Western Front, known as the 100 Days Offensive. Second Battle of the Marne, July-August 1918. This was the first Allied counteroffensive, jointly executed by French and American forces. It completely halted Germany's final advance and marked the beginning of the Entente's full-scale counterattack. Second Battle of the Somme, August-September 1918. British and Australian forces achieved important victories, pushing back German troops from strong defensive positions they had held for many years. Battle of Saint-Mihiel, September 1918. Under the command of General John J. Pershing, this was one of the first large-scale operations entirely conducted by American forces, demonstrating the combat capabilities of this new force and breaching a dangerous German salient. Meuse-Argonne Offensive, September-November 1918. This was the largest and bloodiest operation in American military history, with over 1 million U.S. soldiers participating. The offensive lasted 47 days and ultimately broke through Germany's formidable Hindenburg Line, opening the way for Allied forces to advance deep into German territory. Successive defeats on the Western Front, coupled with an increasingly chaotic internal situation, pushed Germany into an extremely difficult position. Simultaneously, Germany's allies successively surrendered, severely weakening the Central Powers' fighting capacity. Bulgaria was the first nation to surrender on September 29, 1918, after fierce attacks by Allied forces from the Macedonian front. The Ottoman Empire, Turkey, after heavy defeats in the Middle East against British and Arab forces, and with Bulgaria's surrender cutting off communication lines with Germany, signed an armistice on October 30, 1918. The Austro-Hungarian Empire, facing internal disintegration due to surging nationalist movements and successive defeats on the Italian and Balkan fronts, signed an armistice on November 3, 1918. By the end of October, the empire had dissolved into several independent nations. The collapse of its allies left Germany completely isolated. The situation within Germany also became chaotic. The populace was exhausted by the war, suffered severe food shortages, and endured immense losses. A wave of German revolution erupted, starting with the mutiny of sailors in Kiel in late October, which then spread into widespread protests and strikes across the country. Workers and soldiers formed Soviet councils, following Russia's example. Under the pressure of the revolutionary movement and the risk of civil war, Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany was forced to abdicate on November 9, 1918, and fled to the Netherlands. 2 days later, a provisional government of the Weimar Republic was formed and immediately sought peace. At 11:00 a.m. on November 11, 1918, in a railway car in the Compiègne forest, France German representatives signed the armistice with the Allied powers. The Great War, the war to end all wars, had finally ceased. Guns fell silent across all fronts, bringing an eerie but profound relief to an exhausted world. Germany accepted unconditional surrender, agreeing to withdraw troops from occupied territories and hand over weapons and war materials. November 11 became Armistice Day, a historical milestone marking the end of an era and the beginning of a new world. However, Germany's unconditional surrender and the harsh terms of the subsequent peace treaty would sow the seeds of new conflicts and instability, leading to unintended consequences in the future. The war ended, but its painful legacy and deep fissures would haunt the world for decades to come. A painful legacy and a fractured whirlwind. The final shots fell silent on November 11, 1918. An eerie silence enveloped Europe, leaving behind only devastation and mourning. World War I, an unprecedented global conflict in history, left a horrific human and material legacy, reshaping the world map and sowing the seeds for future conflicts. The statistics on casualties and economic, social damage from the war are truly staggering. An estimated 15 to 22 million people died, including both soldiers and civilians, making it one of the largest human catastrophes in history. Millions more suffered permanent injuries, both physical and psychological. A generation of European youth was wiped out, leaving behind a lost generation with unhealable scars. The belligerent nations spent an astronomical sum, estimated at hundreds of billions of dollars in contemporary value, leading to massive public debts and hyperinflation. Factories, roads, bridges, and infrastructure in many parts of Europe were severely destroyed. Social life was completely overturned, with an increase in disease, famine, and chaos. A sense of disillusionment, pessimism, and profound skepticism towards traditional values permeated society. In the ashes of the old empires, several new powers rose. The rise of the United States and Japan was one of the most significant geopolitical consequences. The United States, although entering the war late, became the world's largest creditor, replacing Britain's financial dominance. The American economy boomed due to war production and supplying goods to the Allied powers. America's military strength was also proven on the battlefield, affirming its status as a new global superpower. Japan, by seizing German colonies in Asia and the Pacific, along with expanding its economic influence in China, became the dominant power in East Asia, laying the groundwork for later expansionist ambitions. However, the most evident consequence on the world map was the collapse of four great empires. The Russian Empire completely collapsed after two revolutions in 1917, giving way to the birth of the Soviet state. The German Empire ended its monarchy, transitioned to the Weimar Republic, and suffered under the harsh terms of the Treaty of Versailles. The Austro-Hungarian Empire disintegrated into several smaller nations, such as Austria, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, and parts of its territory were claimed by neighboring countries. The Ottoman Empire also dissolved and was replaced by the Republic of Turkey, along with the formation of new Middle Eastern states under British and French mandates. The collapse of these empires redrew the maps of Europe and the Middle East, creating many new nations, but simultaneously sowing the seeds for prolonged border and ethnic disputes. Most notably, the Russian Revolution and the ideological confrontation that lasted throughout the 20th century are among the longest-lasting legacies of World War I. The emergence of the Bolshevik communist government in Russia, with an ideology completely opposed to capitalism, created an invisible iron curtain that divided the world into two camps. The conflict between capitalism and socialism, between liberal democracy and totalitarian regimes, shaped international relations throughout the Cold War, affecting every corner of the globe. Finally, the severe consequences of World War I and social-economic instability created the seeds of fascism in Germany and Italy. In Germany, the humiliation of the Treaty of Versailles, the massive war reparations burden, and the post-war economic crisis created fertile ground for extreme nationalism and the rise of the Nazi Party under the leadership of Adolf Hitler. Hitler exploited public discontent, promising to restore national honor and resolve the crisis, leading to the establishment of the fascist regime. Similarly, in Italy, disappointment over not achieving desired territorial gains, along with political and social instability, paved the way for Benito Mussolini and fascism to seize power. Both regimes harbored expansionist ideologies, militarism, and hostility towards other nations, creating a new threat to world peace. World War I was called the war to end all wars, but in reality, it was precisely the opening act for World War II. The harsh terms of the Treaty of Versailles, especially for Germany, created deep injustice and resentment, fueling revanchism, unresolved ethnic issues, the failure of the League of Nations to maintain peace, and the expansion of fascist powers in Germany, Italy, and Japan pushed the world into an even more devastating conflict just 2 decades later. World War I is a great scar on human history, a painful testament to the consequences of power, ambitions, extreme nationalism, and diplomatic failure. It not only claimed the lives of millions, but also permanently altered the world order, ushering in a new era of political, economic, and social upheavals whose effects are still felt today.